We're good to go? That's great. Thank you very much for joining me today. My name is Paul Groom from Cognitio, and the title slide here confirms the topic I'll be covering. We try to be a little bit more anecdotal and humorous in our slide sets, try and make it a bit more interesting from you because there's no end of technology presentations throughout this event over 2 days. So hopefully try and keep the tone a little bit more light and interesting. So like all of these events, everybody here is typically bringing in lots of mobile devices. It's one of those events where you say, whatever you do, don't switch those devices off, keep tweeting, keep engaging. The thing I would say is please keep this mobile device you brought with you alive and operating today. It'll be a little bit older than some of the young mobile devices you have in your hands, but please make sure that it is fully recording everything that's going on today. And when you leave the room, please switch it into broadcast mode to carry the news out into the wider audience. But keep in mind that this amazing device that you've been carrying around since birth, and probably many of you took it to college where you then attempted to preserve it with a couple of years of alcohol, and probably in later life, probably a little bit more to keep it going a bit longer. This is about intelligence. It's the intelligence that we carry with us, the intelligence that we develop and carry through our lives. But if you're here today, you're also representing another intelligence, which is that of your corporation or business. This pulsing beast, this need for information, this need for discovery, planning, execution is vital to the ongoing needs of a business. And I doubt many of you here today are here as part of a charity or a non-profit organization. You're probably from a commercial entity, and that commercial entity is very much around making money and developing growth and future. So by virtue of you being in this event, you are all participants in this. And by virtue of deciding to come to this room, I would think that your interest in business intelligence is well set. And you're participating in these tools, processes, and objectives to pass that information through into the business. So let's just quickly revisit what business intelligence is all about in terms of the why. Community, we've already heard that mentioned today in terms of the Hadoop infrastructure, but there's a community within the business. This may be departmental, it may be regional, but you're part of a set or a group that has an objective and some common behavior. You're always acquiring data. You're always looking in your email. You're always interacting with tools and technologies. That information is passing in front of you. Some of you be serving information through to others. There's lots of viewing, whether it be through classic desktops or mobile, and we'll come on to that. There's no end of learning. This is part of educating and developing the intelligence of the business. Action, there's no point discovering things if you're not going to do something with it. It's important that the actions, the lever pulling, as one of my colleagues puts it, occurs in the business so that the value, and remember we've already heard today in the keynote about the 3 V's. Don't forget the 4th, the value of the data, of the information, of the intelligence. And of course, it's ongoing. It's a cycle. It never stops. As actions bring changes, you're recording the actions, that brings more data, more viewing, and you're in a continual loop and cycle of interaction. It never goes away. What is business intelligence? Well, to many, it's just these items here. Numbers, charts, figures. They see it in terms of the tools, the GUI that sits in front of them at their desk, or if they're lucky, on a mobile device that they carry around with them. There's the element of time in terms of the history that you're allowed to look into, but more troubling, the issue of lag. How long between an event occurring in the business and you being able to see or interact or interoperate with that. Then there is access. The ability to interact with that data, to gain depth by looking into the data, to drill through and inspect and pass through. And of course, the bane of everyone's life, there's the control and security in terms of dictating who can and who can't access given pieces of information at any given time. And then ultimately to the end user, it's about consumption. It's about the ability of receiving that information and then being able to enact or progress something through the business. And the idea is to make that as easy as possible. And a lot of the tools vendors, their whole ethos and approach is about improving that. And of course, for the end user, that's what they want, ease and simplicity. The idea is to remove the barriers, to make it easier to engage. We're hearing a lot in this conference, certainly through the keynotes today, about lakes of data. Very bold, very scale, but is there the ease in there? And this is part of what I want to look at today. It's all well and good having a lake, but drinking from it isn't always a straightforward process. Then we've got the business intelligence desires, and deliberately I put the optional intelligence there in terms of it's what the business desires. We've heard today, Merv Adrian, the suits and the hoodies. Perfect analogy between the business and the technicians who are serving their needs. So the business, the end users who are interacting here, they're wanting things to be more timely. It's all well and good having big data, having volume, having the ability to store anything at any time, but they want to be able to get at it in a timely, rapid fashion. Ultimately, latency, the ability to shorten the time cycles between events. Now, Hadoop is largely a batch-oriented infrastructure. As we've already seen today with the move into version 2, they're going to start to strip away that batch orientation and move more to interactivity. But we're talking about BI users who have been interacting with very expensive data warehouse platforms where the timescales, if you come from an OLAP community, your timescales are measured in seconds in terms of interaction, not in terms of hours or days that you may be getting through some of the Hadoop implementations. Depends on your business and its sophistication. Ultimately, the business wants richer models. It's not just about the data in the lake that was mentioned today. There is data scattered in a range of platforms in the data warehouse. That's not going to disappear overnight. It may be progressively subsumed, but it's here and it has a value. And it's part of that rigor and structure that the business has invested in, the quality of the information and the conformity of the information that has the value. Ultimately, granularity. As we've seen today, a large number of frequency of events, actions, interactions, and the business wishes to engage with that to draw information from it. We heard Merv mention lossy behavior. Granularity is about eliminating the lossiness. It's about getting down to the full value so that if you calculate something, you can calculate it to the nearest cent. There are more users. More people need to be empowered. The reality I find is, and in fact this was mentioned earlier today, is it's more about interactions. Is it about the number of people that can access this, or is it about the level of frequency of access and the use of what is provided? And ultimately, self-service. People want to be able to just reach in and do this with, again, minimal fuss, minimal overheads, and the ability to get stuck in, which is part of what the community is offering. A layer that's wrapping over the top of this now is the whole mobile revolution. Now, the mobile space is as much about the mobility and those interactions occurring away from the traditional desktop. Think historically, most of us in this room would complete our interactions sat at a desk designated by our employer at a terminal provided to us by IT, and hopefully with an application or two that we wanted. These days, we're used to free roaming, free access, and a range of applications that we can tap into. And it's fascinating watching the Twitter sphere at the moment. You know, as the keynote's running, material is flying by as people are feeding their comments and comments on comments. The business needs to catch up and adopt this, but it's also about the generation of data. As you are interacting, using, viewing, entering information, that is being logged, recorded, inspected, decisions are being made upon it to maybe send you something or prompt you with something, some form of advertising, etc. And again, there's a complete continuous cycle. Now, we've all got mobile, but the reality in this day and age of somebody standing at the door and saying, it's like the movie theaters of saying, switch it all off, go quiet, please, respect your fellow viewers. Well, in our BI age, that's a tough gig, and certainly in a situation like this. And when you start to see some of these statistics coming through in terms of the attitude towards mobile, and again, remember, as a viewer, a device you can use to access information, but also by incidence, the device that is generating information, we're in a tight circle of growth. And of course, as the younger generation come through, those with the younger brain devices that we were looking at earlier, their attitude to this will be fundamentally different to some of us who've grown up in the classic pigpen-based office environments with the desktop terminals. For them, the interactions, the activity will be on shorter, faster cycles, and the business has to make use of this. So behind the scenes of the mobile revolution, we have a data flow. Interesting enough, the description today was of lakes. Well, my view is on data flow is it's more like these massive jets coming out of the back of a dam. The question is where do you want to be looking at your information? Technically, you should be looking at the information in the white water here, because that has the lowest latency. That is the information that's coming hot off of the application or off of the interaction. As it heads further downstream into the blue water, okay, it has value, but information has a shelf life. And our current applications drive that shelf life ever shorter. So you're interacting or needing to interact ever faster. Within the BI community, we have a disrupting force. The classic BI tools are being partly eclipsed now by some of these new upstarts. I mean, if anybody doubts the success in this domain, look at the IPO of Tableau recently. I think now with a nominal valuation of a few billion. Not bad for a small GUI visualization discovery app that not too many years ago, not many people had heard of. And the reason for this, and for the other applications here, is the business users no longer want to be constrained. They don't want to be force-fed or limited in terms of the information they're interacting with. They want the ability to drag and drop, interact, go ad hoc as and when they need it, to shape the data, present the data, and view the data in a form that's palatable to them, which isn't necessarily the same for all the users. Traditional BI produces structure and reports, but the designer tends to influence what you're seeing and how it's laid out on the screen. These tools give a hell of a lot more freedom to the end user. I think this is a great word. It's one that people look over, but consider the number of vowels in that word. You've got 4 vowels in a row. It's kind of cool, really. Be interested to hear if anyone knows of another word that has 4 vowels in a row like that. Plateaued. But BI tools have, and these are the mainstream corporate enterprise level BI tools I'm talking about. But interestingly enough, this isn't a fresh situation. This has occurred in the past. It's not a new thing. If you go back into the 90s, the world of decision support and classic reporting, get my words out straight there, plateaued in the late 90s, and what came through? The data mining revolution. Everybody suddenly went down into the neural nets, decision trees, and started to get ever deeper and more complicated in the way they, in terms of their expectations from the data and the way they interacted with it. In the noughties, we've had a resurgence in the BI tools, particularly around visualization. Now we have that cooling off again because they can only take it so far. There's only so many variations of a chart or a representation of information that us as humans can absorb and interact with. There's only so many variations of 3-dimensional structure, color, rotation that we can get with and absorb. So we're reaching the points of the human ability to absorb and digest the information. So what tends to happen now is it's pushing deeper into analytics. And we have the words that were talked about today in terms of the rise of data science. And it's fascinating. I've had a range of conversations with people out there, and this is a rapid rise with some amazing price tags. The reality, oops, it would help if I press the right button, is what this all means is more math. We're moving into ever more complex math calculations, and it goes even deeper. To push this button more firmly. So we end up with considerably more math. And that's what data analytics is about. We're employing people who understand the math, who can experiment with it, deploy it, find value from it, and then explain what they've done and the information they have presented back to the business users, because as far as the business users have gone, this stuff has just gone right over their heads, and in fact probably many of our heads in terms of the complexity going on. This revolution is largely being led through R. Again, another open source product that has come about through large amounts of collaboration within the community and widely seeded into the universities. And the reason? Zero cost. So there have been no end of classic statistical and analytical tools out there. But of course, the younger generation, the up-and-coming generation, have been using this one. So this one is driving a lot of the activity and a lot of the complex calculations that are running through. So what we end up now with is a spectrum of use in terms of, you'll be familiar obviously with the classic reporting and BPM style activities, obviously traditional statistical analysis, clustering, modeling behavior, etc., that progression on through. But the interesting twist now is those activities used to be projects. They would have a life cycle measured in weeks or months. The reality now is this is moving ever closer to so-called real time. Let's put it into business time. A cluster can be calculated on the fly from a complex data set if you have the right sort of horsepower to do this. Ultimately, as you go through to things like the machine learning and dynamic simulation, those tight interactions, tight interoperations of use and also events being generated by use means that we can go into tighter circles and begin to influence them. And the marketeer's dream is about influence. But influence requires feedback, measurement to assess value, to assess progress, to assess use. And what we require here is the math to drive that. So the reality is in classic reporting, if we take a standard report, I'm sure many of you have sat at a screen in front of something like this, is that over time, what sits behind some of those cells of numbers has got increasingly more complex. The SQL has got from just simple requests for the number's already been calculated at some point, and you just request it, to some degree of aggregation calculated on the fly, to deeper complex aggregates, through to the fact now that you can inject inline code and execute that within the SQL so that you have calculated a measure or model. I mean, on this screen here, at the bottom here, just those two letters, the LM linear model, that's where all the extensive math is being executed to calculate forwards. The rest is just setting the data up to pass it through to those two letters. Now this is just an example using R here. But the reality is behind the scenes, there is more pressure on the infrastructure in terms of computation, calculation, and delivery. So what we end up with is workload. The workload goes into a device, goes into the infrastructure, classic database, data warehouse, and the work passes on through. But the workload ultimately passes through some sort of restriction because nothing provides infinite capacity. So we end up with a series of workloads that as we start to move into more dynamic computation, the actual work that's passing through the systems gets more lumpy, more demanding. And that in itself brings problems unless you can begin to open up that bottleneck, alleviate that pressure point, and allow more throughput. And I've got an expression currently that I think fits very well with our domain, which is work done. People get very hung up on speed and performance. But in terms of the actual business need, it's about getting a certain volume of work through, delivered and processed, and keeping that up at a steady, high-volume pace so that the business can get a broader value. It's no use taking a discrete query and making that a second, because you can't really performance tune beyond that. Whoop, you take it from a second to half a second. Wow, great win. However, if I have a large amount of these complex bubbles passing through, and as a general throughput, I can push them through en masse as work done, then there is a value. So it brings us back to the point of time. The expression here, time to influence, has two elements to it. There is the time needed to influence, the time needed to gather the information, prepare something, an act or interaction that will generate the influence. But there is also the immediacy of time to influence in terms of you need to be influenced now. I'm influencing you now. So time to influence has two values. This picture has an interesting connotation. We're a few minutes to noon. A few people might have found the title of our presentation a little bit interesting, but of course high noon brings with it the classic confrontation, and this is part of what's going on in the business today. The business was moving along with databases, data warehouses quite comfortably. There was control, rigor. Now we've had the discovery tools, the explosion in big data, the use of Hadoop as a disruptive force to allowing people to engage with that. And now you've got the balance between the business users and the deliverers of the infrastructure and the capability getting a little bit more fractious. Maybe not quite full-blown gunfights, but there is disruption there in terms of the behavior and attitudes. And this brings with it potential for new things, new frontiers, which was obviously what was going on in the American history here. But it brings with it some problems. So let's just do a quick scorecard in terms of where we're at with the earlier points I raised around the desires on business intelligence and the Hadoop and big data. You know, where does it leave us? Well, it hasn't, I would argue it hasn't helped with Timely. Timely is about the end user in terms of them being able to interact. The data is captured on a more timely fashion, but the end user's ability to interact with the data isn't necessarily more timely. It hasn't necessarily at the moment fixed the latency. The comments today about Yarn and the 2.0 progression of Hadoop in the community is very much about removing latency issues within the execution of MapReduce jobs. You cannot do anything rapidly with MapReduce. It has an overhead, it has a cost. So stripping that away is important. So at present, that's not fixed. We certainly got richer data. That was well established in the keynotes today. I don't think anybody would dispute that. We can absorb through technologies such as Hadoop any class of data or information and make it available. Definitely granularity. No need to be throwing data away anymore. Just capture it all, keep and use. More interactions. Well, with your Hadoop, I would argue not at this moment in time because it's largely batch-oriented. It will do large-scale operations, but not necessarily provide an interactive use. I'd be interested to know, has anybody here got an app or an application on their device that directly triggers an action within a Hadoop environment? Anybody? Any takers on that? Okay, so we've got a little way to go yet before that passes its way through. And self-service, well, yes, there are tools and technologies available. I'm sure there'll be other presenters throughout the 2 days who will show you ways of making that easier, and certainly ourselves at Cognitio will as well. So a little bit of step back, a little bit of review in terms of the data warehouse. I've done presentations at these events in the past and have used this simple metaphor of the data warehouse of a castle. It's the point of law in the business. It's that solid, intractable thing that has been built It's got edifice, it's got position, everyone knows it's there, everyone knows who built it and why. The reality, however, as I mentioned in the past, is compared to a modern castle, you can join the queue, you can have the guidebook, you're allowed to see certain parts of it, but you don't necessarily get to roam free within the data warehouse. And at times it can get very busy and you just have to sit there in the queue and wait for your time. So the data warehouse is struggling because of the amount of information being passed into it. Of course, if you take the converse view, the IT and technologists running the data warehouse see it this way in terms of the never-ending demands of the end users in terms of what they want. We can't put that data in, it's challenging. We will see that they are always fighting back on this situation. I took a little perspective on this one about American history and castles. You didn't really build castles. Do you know why? Because your frontier was moving so fast. The Wild West was over literally in a matter of a few years as the wave moved from east through to west. There was no time to build anything of permanence and structure. You had to build it from a defensive and structural fashion. There are very few examples left lying around. And of course, this example here is Disney. A few of you have probably been there in your past as children just to see the representation of what occurred. And this is what's happening in our industry. The frontier now is moving so much faster in terms of the flow of data and activity that the poor old data warehouse is now beginning to be seen as dull. And dare I even say it as the extra point here, boring. And of course, having built data warehouses, the elephant came along. Mine's not as well animated as the one earlier today. That was pretty cool. And obviously, we're all here. But as was mentioned in terms of holes in the wall, well, I've got the concept of ticks in the boxes. Hadoop doesn't serve all. It doesn't cover all the possibilities yet. It'll get there with time, but for now, there are gaps. It's certainly solved the issue of economics. There's no doubts that it has massively cut costs for dealing with the volume and velocity side of life, which is great, but it still hasn't solved the BI interaction. So, here's a classic middle manager saying, I've heard about this Hadoop, we're building something with it. We've got this whole new approach, we're grabbing all the data. So, he's got his post-it note there. We've got to wade into that, get the data science team. They're not having to triage or plan or prep the data to come in. It's all flowing through. And of course, they just want to plug straight into Hadoop. The reality, however, is, it doesn't plug in quite so cleanly. I can't just directly interact. We've already heard today that Hive is itself not able to fully serve the needs, both from in terms of performance, functionality, and richness. There are bridges back to the traditional world. The early bridge building, again, was using local resources, not to the industrial quality we have today. And it's the same in terms of technologies available for Hadoop and bridging back to the core enterprise. Technologies such as Sqoop give us the ability to interact between the warehouse and the databases and Hadoop, but it's not really for heavy lifting. And of course, if you're going to start moving elephants on big bridges, you need to be well planned and well structured for that. And of course, if we wind the clock back a few years, there was this position of noSQL, and that was as a statement, we don't want SQL, not good enough, not needed. Push it out, push it away. So, it almost went out across the business, SQL no longer valid. Well, hey folks, the reality is business has spoken, and if you're not sure about this, look at some of these technologies, again, already mentioned today. If you don't think SQL is relevant to a business and a business intelligence need, look at these initiatives and ourselves, Cognitio, in terms of our alignment to this space, the ability to serve the business users and to deliver something to them. Because this is the challenge. It's the issue for the business, and it hasn't gone away yet. Some of the initiatives like the Impalas, they're still in alpha. They've got a way to go, a lot of engineering to be delivered yet. The good news for us all is we finally have a balance of technology. if you go back historically, there was always an imbalance. One of these components didn't always stand up to the others. For once, we now have full compute ability, full flexible storage ability, and networks that can cope and grow. And the good news is RAM's got really cheap as well. So it means that you can now move a lot more information into memory and therefore gain some of the benefits. So Hadoop, just as a reminder, a lot of these guys spinning around, storing the data, providing that safe, reliable repository. But at the moment, there haven't been so many of these guys in terms of getting the work done. And remember, it's the CPU that does the work. It's the CPU that does the complex calculations. Remember the earlier point about lots of math? Well, that has to occur through the CPU. So the more of those you can bring to bear, and the more actively you can feed them with the data, the more work that can be done. Some people think, well, just roll Flash in. Well, I'm sorry, but Flash isn't the solution. Flash allows certain elements of I/O to be improved, but keep in mind you've got an economics issue with this. They're on much smaller capacities, and they have a considerably higher cost. So this isn't something I don't think anybody's going to rush to flash wash a Hadoop cluster just to get things faster. It's just not viable. But some of the big enterprise solution vendors flash wash their products to say this is the way to get the speed and the performance and the analytics. And of course, analytics needs to be quick on the draw. We've already established the issues of latency and performance. So the trick is not to hold things back. The way of doing that is to have the data pinned in memory, close to the CPU, so you're not waiting on I/O cycles. You're not waiting for the disk subsystem to yield the information. So Cognitio's proposition around this is to introduce an intermediate layer, an in-memory analytical platform that can tap straight into the underlying persistence layers, can just reach in, pull data out of Hadoop, data warehouse, the cloud as required, bring data models into memory, and then allow all the standard tools, all that standard infrastructure to plug straight into that and interoperate. And using all the interfaces that you would expect, ODBC, JDBC, even MDX for the OLAP community, and to offer very low latency, very high frequency, very complex computations and operations. The reality means that all of those tools and technologies can just plug straight in using the Cognitio intermediate layer. But ultimately, that rides on the back of the elephant in terms of where the persistent store is. Remember, we were gathering all of that large-scale information, and that's where the data is going to persist and reside. You don't want to be moving data from disk to disk. You want to be moving it from disk to RAM and then allow the users to interact with it. And what you hold in RAM may have a persistency measured in days, weeks, possibly only even hours. It doesn't have to sit there for year on year on year, which is the traditional data warehouse model. And that's what the data scientists need. They need that agility, the ability to interact and reach in. The way we interact with Hadoop, the best analogy I could think of here is whenever anybody sees a bowl of candy, is their desire just to reach in and grab a chunk, and that's the way it should be. So Cognitio has connectors that allow us just to reach in using standard Hadoop-type techniques, HDFS access, etc., to just reach in, pull the data out on an actively filtered basis. And then it can be consumed. And again, the principle of bringing it to memory is to consume it with rapid, low latency, high frequency access. So the noSQL community has progressed on now and moved into the not only SQL community. SQL is going to be the main data management language. That is now well set, well established. The business community has spoken, and all the initiatives you'll hear about through this conference will only reinforce that. But Cognitio and others have shown that you can encapsulate other languages in. So we can take those languages such as Python and R, remember the computation, and execute them on a massively parallel basis. Now this is something new and fresh, something where you just use SQL with R directly within it. Just combine the two languages, no special requirements, and yet full massively parallel execution. So again, getting large amounts of work done. So discovery and interaction, the data sciences are helping that along. Combine that with the time to influence, the ability to react and move. It's important that you can progress the understanding into production. So again, there's no point in having an environment where your ability to graduate from what a data scientist can help you with to the production benefits of that is measured in weeks or months. And again, the ability to move a data model into an in-memory environment on an agile, rapid execution basis, use it, exploit it for production use, whether it be directly on premises or cloud, that's your choice in terms of the preference for where you like to maintain your data. So keep this in mind. It's very important that speed isn't just about discrete queries, it's the speed of the business ability to get through to full production use. And at this point, we get to the ability that the scorecard starts to look more complete in terms of we get the richness of the data, we get the tools and technologies to maintain and protect that and absorb it in terms of Hadoop, and then the bridge of in-memory to allow the BI users, those enterprise business intelligence users, to interact in a way that they would like to see. And I found this interesting quote about the Wild West. I'll leave you to read it for a second. But it's interesting about this point of frontier. And I think this didn't come through in today's session, but we're all on a new frontier in the world of data and business, and it's a rapidly moving frontier. And the frontier itself is disruptive, exciting, invigorating, damaging for some maybe, but it will roll on through to bring with it a new generation. And I think the classic image of the West being broken down is the involvement of infrastructure. And Hadoop will move through to be the future infrastructure of business. It will link, as in this picture here, the East and the West, bring them together so that ultimately the gunfighters were overtaken by the shopkeepers, the artisans, the builders, the general population who then flowed through on that infrastructure and ultimately moved through to a new business. And therefore, for us, part of this is driving the golden spike as the group of people did here originally as the transcontinental came together. And we believe in memory between the Hadoop community and the BI community is part of the offering for the golden spike for the future. Okay, so they're reminding me at the back there that I need to bring this to a close. Some contact details here. We have a booth in the center of the main hall. Just look for the largest orange globe in the ceiling directly below that. That's where we are, so please come and have a chat. I'm happy to take a few questions now. There'll only be a few because we're a little bit tight for time as the next speaker comes on in. Yes?
So, if you folks are doing this in memory, you have high availability in terms of failover and being able to provide that high availability.
Okay, so the question here is about in-memory and high availability. Do they go together? Absolutely yes. So we have high availability capabilities with the product to keep it available. It is, I will be clear, however, not non-stop. So again, non-stop is a very difficult thing to achieve. High availability is certainly something we've engineered for, so yes. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for your participation today. I hope it was a valuable session. And I hope the 2 days bring you lots more valuable insight to the industry.